Jake pressed his face against the cold metal of the viewing window, watching the stars spin slowly past the orphanage station. The other kids were playing in groups across the big common room, but nobody ever asked him to join. It wasn't because he was the only human here. The station had lots of different species, and they all got along fine. It was his eyes that made everyone nervous. Those golden eyes weren't normal, even for a human. They seemed to glow softly in the dim light, like tiny suns burning inside his head. When Jake looked at people, they always looked away fast, as if his stare made them uncomfortable. The scaled kids from Reptilia Prime would hiss quietly when he walked by. The bug-like mantids clicked their mandibles and scurried to different tables during meals. Even the energy beings, who were usually friendly to everyone, kept their distance. Jake didn't understand why. He was just 8 years old, same as most of the other orphans. He'd lost his parents in the war zones of the Outer Rim, just like they had. But somehow, he was different in ways that scared people. Down in the station director's office, Maria Thompson sat hunched over her computer screen, reading Jake's medical files for the 100th time. The numbers didn't make sense. His DNA showed patterns she'd never seen before, not in any species database. Some of his genetic sequences looked almost artificial, like they'd been designed rather than evolved. "David, come look at this," she called to her assistant. David Park hurried over, adjusting his glasses as he peered at the screen. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "Jake's blood work. See these protein chains? They don't match anything in our records. And his brain scans show activity levels that should be impossible for a child his age." Maria rubbed her tired eyes. "But he's just a regular kid who lost his family. The rescue teams found him floating in an escape pod after his colony ship was destroyed." David studied the data. "Maybe it's just a rare human mutation. You know how adaptable their species is." "Maybe," Maria said, but her voice carried doubt. Every time she looked into Jake's golden eyes, she felt like she was staring at someone much older than 8 years. There was knowledge there that no child should possess. That same night, Jake lay in his small bunk in the children's dormitory, listening to the soft breathing and strange sounds of his alien roommates. As sleep took him, his dreams filled with images that felt more like memories than imagination. He saw massive ships, bigger than entire cities, cutting through the darkness of space. Their hulls gleamed with a strange metallic substance that seemed alive, pulsing with energy patterns. In his dream, Jake stood on the bridge of one of these vessels, but he wasn't 8 years old anymore. He was tall and commanding, wearing robes that sparkled with embedded stars. Other beings, species he'd never seen before, bowed when he passed. They called him by titles he couldn't quite remember when he woke up, but the feelings of authority and responsibility remained. More disturbing were the star names that echoed in his sleeping mind. Zirion Prime. The Crimson Nebula. The Gates of Andromeda. These weren't places he'd learned about in the station's basic education classes. These were locations that existed in his dreams but nowhere in the current star charts. Jake jolted awake, sweat beading on his forehead. The golden glow in his eyes was brighter now, bright enough to cast shadows on the wall beside his bed. He quickly squeezed them shut, not wanting to wake his roommates. The next morning during their educational tour of the station, something strange happened. The group was visiting the navigation center, where the station's pilots showed them how they calculated jump routes between star systems. Jake found himself drawn to the main console, its screens displaying familiar-looking star maps. Without thinking, he reached out and touched the smooth surface. Immediately, the display changed. New coordinates appeared, marking locations that weren't in any official database. Route calculations began running automatically, plotting courses to systems that supposedly didn't exist. The pilot on duty stared in shock. "Kid, how did you do that? This system is voice-locked and requires officer-level clearance." Jake pulled his hand back, frightened by what had just happened. "I don't know. I just touched it." Maria, who'd been watching the tour, felt a chill run down her spine. She'd seen the boy's medical files. She knew there was something unusual about him. But this was beyond unusual. This was impossible. Later that day, David tried to calm her fears. "Look, humans are incredibly intuitive. Maybe he just has a natural talent for navigation systems." But Maria couldn't shake the feeling that Jake's golden eyes held secrets that went far deeper than natural talent. Something was awakening in that boy, something that might change everything they thought they knew about humans and their place in the galaxy. Jake stood in the center of the combat simulation room, 16 years old now and taller than most of his alien classmates. His golden eyes had grown brighter over the years, glowing like molten metal even in normal lighting. The other students formed a wide circle around him, watching nervously as he prepared for the advanced tactical exercise. The simulation began, and holographic enemy ships appeared all around him. Most students would panic at the sight of 50 hostile vessels attacking from different angles. Instead, Jake moved like he was dancing to music only he could hear. His hands flew across the control panels, commanding defensive positions and counterattacks with movements so fluid they seemed automatic. Within 3 minutes, every enemy ship was destroyed. Jake hadn't even broken a sweat. "Impossible," whispered Korath, a four-armed student from the hivemind species. His people were born with natural tactical abilities, bred over thousands of years to think strategically. No single being should be able to coordinate that many variables at once. The instructor, a grizzled veteran named Captain Brooks, shook his head in amazement. "I've been running these simulations for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like that. Jake, where did you learn those attack patterns?" Jake lowered his hands, looking confused. "I don't know. It just felt right, like I'd done it before." But he had done it before, in dreams that came every night now. Dreams where he commanded fleets of crystal ships across star systems he'd never visited. Dreams where beings made of pure light bowed before a throne that felt familiar beneath his hands. Each morning he woke with tactical knowledge that shouldn't exist in any textbook. Down in the medical bay, Dr. Elizabeth Hayes studied Jake's latest blood samples with growing alarm. She'd been the station's chief medical officer for 15 years, treating dozens of different species, but she'd never seen anything like this. The cells in Jake's blood were changing, evolving in real time. His neural pathways showed connections that defied every medical textbook she'd ever read. Brain activity that should have burned out his nervous system was somehow being handled effortlessly by structures that hadn't existed in his earlier scans. She picked up her communication device and called Maria's office. "Director Thompson, we need to talk about Jake. Now." Maria arrived within minutes, finding Elizabeth pacing nervously around her lab equipment. "Tell me what's wrong," Maria said, though part of her already knew she wouldn't like the answer. Elizabeth pulled up Jake's medical records on the wall screen. "Look at these cellular samples. This one is from 8 years ago when he first arrived. This one is from last month." She pointed to two very different images. His DNA is rewriting itself. Not mutating randomly, but following some kind of predetermined pattern. Maria stared at the data. "That's impossible." "That's what I thought too. But watch this." Elizabeth showed her brain scans from Jake's recent medical checkup. "See these neural clusters? They're forming in areas of the brain that humans don't normally use. And the electrical activity levels are off the charts. He should be having seizures constantly, but instead he's becoming smarter and faster every day." "What does it mean?" Elizabeth's voice dropped to a whisper. "I think Jake isn't entirely human anymore. Or maybe he never was." Meanwhile, Jake was walking through the station's central corridor when another episode hit him. The walls around him seemed to fade away, replaced by towering crystal structures that reached toward alien skies. In this vision, he wore robes that seemed to be made of starlight itself, walking through halls where beings of energy and light waited for his commands. He could hear their voices, speaking in a language he somehow understood perfectly. They called him by titles that made his heart race with recognition. Emperor. The Golden One. The Awakened. The vision lasted only seconds, but when it ended, Jake found himself standing with his palm pressed against the station's main computer terminal. Warning lights were flashing, and data was streaming across every screen in the corridor faster than any organic mind should be able to process. But Jake was processing it. Centuries of galactic history, star charts of regions that were supposed to be unexplored, technical specifications for technologies that didn't officially exist. All of it was downloading directly into his mind through his hand's contact with the terminal. "Jake. Step away from there immediately." Maria's voice cut through his trance. He pulled his hand back, gasping as the connection broke. The data flow stopped, but the information remained in his head, perfectly organized and accessible. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I don't know how that happened. I was just walking by and suddenly I could feel the computer's thoughts." Maria looked at the screens, still displaying fragments of classified information that Jake shouldn't have been able to access. Her hands trembled as she reached for her emergency communication device. "Director Thompson to Galactic Council Headquarters," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Priority 1 transmission. Authorization code Thompson 77 Alpha." The response came immediately. "Go ahead, Director." Maria looked at Jake, who was standing there looking like any confused teenager, except for those golden eyes that now seem to burn within a fire. I need to report a potential code black situation. We have a human child on this station who appears to be accessing information and displaying abilities that shouldn't be possible. I'm requesting immediate investigation by your highest level personnel. There was a pause on the other end. Director, are you certain this requires code black protocols? Maria watched as Jake unconsciously reached toward another computer terminal, then caught himself and pulled his hand back. In that moment, she saw not the frightened 8-year-old she'd cared for all these years, but something ancient and powerful wearing a young man's face. Send someone immediately, she said. We may have a very big problem. Admiral Robert Sterling stepped off the transport ship with the confidence of someone who'd seen everything the galaxy had to offer. Behind him followed a team of the Council's best scientists and investigators, all expecting to deal with what they assumed was a panicked station director and an unusually smart human kid. Sterling had been fighting wars and investigating anomalies for 30 years. In his experience, most emergency calls turned out to be much less dramatic than they initially seemed. Humans were known for being emotional and overreacting to simple situations. Director Thompson, he said, shaking Maria's hand as she met them at the docking bay. I'm here to assess your code black situation. Where's the child in question? Maria led them through the station corridors, her face tight with worry. Jake's in the observation lounge. Admiral, I need you to understand that what you're about to see isn't normal. This boy has been changing, and it's accelerating. They found Jake sitting alone by the massive viewing windows, staring out at the stars. At 18, he looked like any other young human, except for those eyes that seemed to capture and reflect light in impossible ways. When he turned to greet them, Sterling felt an unexpected chill run down his spine. You're from the Council, Jake said, and it wasn't a question. His voice carried a strange quality, as if he was speaking from a great distance. That's right, son. We're here to run some tests, nothing to worry about. Sterling tried to sound casual, but something about the boy's direct stare made him uncomfortable. Captain Lisa Morgan, Sterling's chief science officer, set up her portable scanning equipment. Jake, would like to show you some puzzles and see how you solve them. Is that okay? Jake nodded, and Lisa activated a holographic display showing an ancient symbol covered in complex markings. This is a code that's been stumping our best linguists for over 1,000 years. It was found in ruins from the old empire. We think it might be some kind of lock or security system. Jake glanced at the display for less than 5 seconds. It's not a lock. It's a greeting. It says welcome home, children of the golden light. The throne awaits its rightful heir. The room went completely silent. Lisa checked her equipment twice, thinking it had malfunctioned. Sterling felt his mouth go dry. That's impossible, Lisa whispered. Our translation computers have been working on that for decades. The symbols aren't meant for computers, Jake said, his golden eyes still focused on the hologram. They're genetic. They respond to bloodline recognition, not logical analysis. Sterling exchanged alarmed looks with his team. This was not what they'd expected to find. Lisa, run the genealogical scans. Now. His voice had lost all its casual tone. Lisa activated her most advanced scanning equipment, devices that could trace genetic lineages back thousands of generations. As the data began processing, she called up the Council's most restricted archives, files that contained fragmentary information about the predecessors. The predecessors were legend, almost myth. An advanced civilization that had ruled nearly half the galaxy millennia ago before vanishing without explanation. Some believed they transcended physical existence. Others thought they'd simply died out. But everyone agreed on one thing: they were the most powerful beings who had ever lived. Admiral, Lisa's voice was shaking. You need to see this. The genealogical scan results appeared on her screen, and Sterling felt his blood turn to ice. Jake's genetic markers weren't just unusual. They were matching patterns from the predecessor archives, samples so old and fragmentary that most scientists considered them unreliable. Cross-reference with the prophecy texts, Sterling ordered, though part of him hoped the results would prove this was all some mistake. The ancient texts appeared on screen, written in the same symbolic language Jake had just translated effortlessly. Lisa read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. When the stars align in the seventh age, the golden-eyed emperor shall return. Born among the youngest species, he shall reclaim the throne of worlds and restore the first empire. As if responding to their discovery, something strange began happening throughout the station. Dormant systems that hadn't been active in years suddenly came online. Lights flickered in patterns that seemed almost like communication. The station's computer core began processing data at speeds that should have caused it to overheat. Jake wasn't doing anything obvious to cause these changes. He was just sitting there, but his presence seemed to be awakening technologies around him. "This can't be real," Sterling muttered, watching displays activate across the observation lounge. "Humans have barely been in space for a few hundred years. They're still learning basic interstellar travel. There's no way they could be connected to a civilization that advanced." But even as he spoke, Captain Morgan was receiving reports from across the galaxy. Archaeological teams on dozens of worlds were sending emergency transmissions. Predecessor ruins that had been dormant for thousands of years were suddenly powering up, all at exactly the same time. "Admiral, every single site is resonating with the same genetic frequency," Morgan reported. "The frequency that matches Jake's DNA." Jake stood up from his chair, and for a moment his golden eyes blazed so brightly that everyone in the room had to look away. When the light faded, he was looking directly at Sterling with an expression far older than his 18 years. "I'm starting to remember," Jake said quietly. "Not everything yet, but pieces. Enough to know that your council has been playing with toys while the real power slept." Sterling realized that their investigation had uncovered something far beyond a gifted human child. They'd found the heir to an empire that once spanned star systems, and he was beginning to wake up. Across the galaxy, ancient machines continued their awakening, all responding to the genetic call of a boy who was becoming something much more than human. Commander Patricia Wells was deep inside the ancient ruins on Titan Base when her communication device started screaming with emergency alerts. She'd been studying the massive stone structures for 3 years, trying to understand the strange symbols carved into walls that seemed older than recorded history. The ruins had been completely dead since their discovery, showing no signs of the advanced technology that should have powered such a complex. Until today. Now the entire complex was humming with energy. Lights that hadn't worked for thousands of years were blazing to life. Holographic displays were activating, showing star maps of regions that didn't match any current charts. The air itself seemed to vibrate with power. "Commander Wells to Council Command," she spoke into her device, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to report a code red situation. The predecessor site on Titan Base has fully activated. All systems are online and responding to some kind of external signal." The response came immediately. "Wells, you're the 15th site commander to report activation in the last hour. We're calling an emergency council session. Transmit all your data immediately." Patricia uploaded everything her sensors were recording, but she knew the data couldn't capture what she was actually witnessing. The ancient machines weren't just turning on randomly. They were communicating with each other, and with something else. Something that was calling to them across the vastness of space. 2 hours later, she stood before a holographic projection of the full Galactic Council, representing hundreds of species from across known space. The council chamber was in chaos, with delegates arguing in dozens of different languages. "Order!" shouted Council Speaker Vextar, his 3 heads all speaking in unison. "Commander Wells, report your findings." Patricia activated her data projectors, showing the readings from Titan Base. "Honorable delegates, every predecessor site we've discovered is now active. The energy signatures are identical across all locations, and they're all responding to the same genetic frequency." She paused, knowing her next words would change everything. "The genetic frequency matches the human child currently held at Sector 7 Orphanage Station. Jake isn't just carrying fragments of predecessor DNA. According to our analysis, he is the direct genetic heir of the First Empire." The council chamber erupted. Delegates were shouting, some in fear, others in disbelief. The implications were staggering. If this human child was truly connected to the predecessors, it meant the most powerful civilization in galactic history hadn't vanished at all. They'd been waiting. Admiral James Carter, representing the military faction, stood up abruptly. His scarred face was grim as he spoke. "Delegates, we have only one logical course of action. This threat must be eliminated immediately, before it can fully manifest." Angry voices rose from across the chamber. Dr. Amanda Foster, head of the Council's Research Division, slammed her hand on her desk. "Eliminated? We're talking about an 18-year-old boy. And more importantly, we're talking about the scientific discovery of the millennium. This child could hold the keys to technologies that could advance our entire civilization. Or destroy it," Carter shot back. "The predecessors ruled half the galaxy before they disappeared. If they're returning, do you really think they'll be content to share power with the civilizations that took their place?" The argument continued for hours, but even as the council debated, events were moving beyond their control. In a secure chamber aboard Admiral Sterling's investigation ship, Jake sat quietly while technicians monitored his vital signs. But he wasn't really there anymore, not entirely. His consciousness was expanding, connecting with the awakening ruins across the galaxy. Each activated site added to his growing memory, filling in pieces of a vast puzzle that had been scattered for millennia. When the council finally decided to bring him into their session via holographic projection, Jake was no longer the confused teenager they'd first encountered. He materialized in the center of their chamber, his golden eyes now blazing so brightly that several delegates had to shield their optical senses. "Honorable delegates of the Galactic Council," he said, and his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in the bones of every organic being present. The artificial beings felt the vibrations in their core processes. It was a voice that commanded attention without asking for it. "I remember now," Jake continued, his gaze sweeping across the assembled representatives. "Not everything, but enough to understand what has happened while my people slept." He gestured, and suddenly every display screen in the council chamber activated, showing images from across the galaxy. Ships emerging from fold space, their hulls gleaming with materials that seemed to bend light around them. Technology so advanced that it made the council's most sophisticated vessels look like primitive toys. "You've spent centuries fighting over territories that were once single provinces in my empire. You've struggled to understand technologies that were commonplace before your civilizations learned to make fire. You call yourselves advanced, but you're children playing with fragments of a greater whole." Admiral Carter was on his feet, his hand moving toward his weapon. "Delegates, this proves my point. This being is a threat to everything we've built." Jake looked at Carter with something that might have been pity. "Admiral, your fleet carries weapons powered by crystals mined from predecessor ruins. Your fastest ships use engines based on principles we established before your species developed writing. Everything you consider your greatest achievements are echoes of my people's legacy." The holographic displays showed more ships emerging from fold space. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. An armada that dwarfed every military force in the current galaxy combined. "The question isn't whether I'm a threat to what you've built," Jake said, his golden eyes scanning the terrified faces around him. "The question is whether you'll accept that the children have grown up enough to rejoin the family, or if you'll insist on playing with dangerous toys until someone gets hurt." The chamber fell silent except for the hum of advanced machinery responding to Jake's presence. Across the galaxy, ancient sites continued awakening, and predecessor ships continued emerging from dimensions where they'd waited for their emperor's call. The age of the Council's authority was ending, whether they accepted it or not. Admiral Thomas Mitchell stood on the bridge of the Council flagship, watching the tactical displays with growing dread. His fleet of 300 warships, the largest military force ever assembled by the Galactic Council, looked pathetic compared to what was emerging from fold space around them. Predecessor vessels materialized in perfect formation, their crystalline hulls catching starlight and reflecting it back in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Each ship was the size of a city, powered by technology that the Council's best scientists could barely comprehend. Weapons systems that could crack planets hummed with barely contained energy. "Sir, enemy vessels now number in the thousands," reported his tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Brooks. "Their weapon signatures are off our detection scales. We're completely outmatched." Mitchell had been expecting this moment since the Council's emergency session 3 days ago. The debate had raged for hours, but in the end, fear had won over curiosity. The military faction convinced enough delegates that Jake represented an existential threat to their way of life. "All ships, battle stations," Mitchell commanded. "Target the largest vessels first. If we're going down fighting." But even as he gave the order, part of him wondered if they were making a terrible mistake. The human boy had shown no signs of aggression during the council session. If anything, he'd seemed sad about the whole situation. Back on the orphanage station, Jake stood in the observation lounge where this had all began, his golden eyes now blazing so brightly that the metal around him glowed with reflected light. His transformation was complete. The knowledge of the First Empire flowed through him like a river of molten gold, bringing with it the memories of ruling star systems and commanding forces that could reshape reality itself. He could feel every predecessor ship responding to his presence, their artificial intelligences awakening after millennia of sleep. They were eager for battle, ready to reclaim the galaxy that had once been theirs by right. The Council's pathetic fleet wouldn't last 5 minutes against weapons that could manipulate space and time. But as Jake reached out with his consciousness to give the attack command, another memory surfaced. Not from the ancient empire, but from his childhood on this very station. He was 8 years old again, crying in his bunk after another nightmare about burning worlds. Maria Thompson sat beside him, her gentle hand stroking his hair while she hummed a lullaby from her own childhood on Earth. "It's okay, Jake," she'd whispered. "Bad dreams can't hurt you. And you're not alone. David and I will always be here to keep you safe." The memory was so vivid that Jake could smell Maria's perfume and feel the rough fabric of the station blankets. For a moment, the vast power of the predecessors felt small compared to the warmth of human kindness. "Jake," came Maria's voice over the station's communication system. "Whatever you're thinking of doing, please remember who you are. Not what you've become, but who you've always been." Jake closed his eyes, and more memories flooded back. David teaching him to play chess, patiently explaining strategy while Jake's golden eyes made the older man nervous. The way the other children had gradually learned to accept him, not because of his strange abilities, but because he was kind to them. The birthday parties Maria had organized, making sure no child ever felt forgotten. These weren't the memories of an emperor. They were the memories of a frightened boy who'd been loved and protected by people who owed him nothing. Jake opened his eyes and reached out with his mind, but not to command the attack. Instead, his consciousness touched every ship in both fleets, council and predecessor alike. When he spoke, his voice carried across space itself, reaching every being present without need for communication devices. "Admiral Mitchell. Delegates of the council. People of the galaxy." His words resonated in multiple languages simultaneously, each listener hearing them in their native tongue. "You expected conquest. You expected the return of an empire built on domination and fear." The predecessor ships held their positions, weapons powered but not targeting the council fleet. Jake continued, his voice carrying the authority of ages but also something softer. Something human. "But I learned something during my years among you that my ancestors never knew. I learned that true strength isn't about ruling others through force. It's about protecting those who cannot protect themselves." On the council flagship, Admiral Mitchell watched his tactical screens in amazement. The enemy vessels were surrounding his fleet, but their weapons remained cold. Instead of attack formations, they were taking defensive positions. "The predecessors ruled through power," Jake's voice continued. "But they ruled alone, and loneliness made them cruel. I won't repeat their mistakes. The empire will return, yes, but this time it will be built on something my people never understood. The idea that the strong exist to serve the weak, not the other way around." Jake gestured, and holographic displays appeared throughout both fleets, showing images from across the galaxy. Refugee camps where displaced families struggled to survive. Orphanages like the one where he'd grown up. Planets devastated by the endless border wars that the Council seemed unable to stop. "Every species represented in your council will have a voice in what comes next," Jake announced. "But no more children will go hungry while politicians argue over territory. No more families will be destroyed because leaders can't find better ways to settle their differences." The displays changed, showing construction projects beginning on dozens of worlds. Schools, hospitals, agricultural centers. The predecessor ships were already moving to begin the work, their advanced technology turning wastelands into gardens in hours instead of decades. Back on the orphanage station, Maria Thompson stood at the viewing window, tears streaming down her face as she watched the impossible scene unfolding in space around them. The frightened little boy with golden eyes had grown into someone she barely recognized, but somehow he was still the same kind soul she'd helped raise. "Thank you," she whispered to the stars, not sure if she was talking to Jake or to whatever force had brought him to them all those years ago. Jake's final words echoed across the galaxy: "The age of the Council is ending, but the age of cooperation has just begun. Together, we'll build something better than either of our civilizations achieved alone." The golden-eyed emperor had returned, but he'd brought with him the most revolutionary idea the galaxy had ever known, that power should be used to heal rather than harm, to protect rather than dominate. And it had taken a human heart to teach that lesson to the stars.